Welcome to Ancient Awakening with Castalia. For those of you who don't know, I am Castalia and I do work over on the Realm of Inspiration at elfianrealm.com to help inspire the collective all in their ascension journey. I work to help heal and guide through my channeled readings and coaching sessions. I am a certified Crystal Reiki Master, as well as certified in Greek mythology and ancient Greek gods and goddesses. And what better way to combine both of my passions than to uncover the spiritual metaphors hidden in the myths of ancient Greece. The teachings and guidelines already are there before us. They are just hidden beneath the surface of stories full of tragedy, heartbreak, war, death, love, and more. The time for metaphors is done. So let's find clarity together through a transformative journey that is Ancient Awakening. Last week we discussed our spiritual Achilles heel and ended the episode with 5 journal prompts. So before we dive into episode 4, let's review those journal prompts and let them help us set the tone for this week's episode. So I will give a summary of my answers to the prompts from last week, and I encourage you to reshare your answers in the comment section below and discuss kind of how they made you feel, what your process was journaling with these prompts. So the first prompt is, where in my life do I feel invincible and where do I feel exposed? An area in my life where I feel invincible is public speaking. I feel like it's just something that's always come easy to me, but I feel exposed when I try to do public speaking in Greek because I have the strength of public speaking in English, and as that is my native tongue, but when I go to my second language of Greek, I really do struggle to public speak, and I feel very exposed and very shy in that language. So that's something that's not necessarily like deep spiritual, but that is a valid answer to the question. And truthfully, I feel like the areas that we feel invincible, there might be aspects or different versions of those areas where we feel exposed. So public speaking in Greek for me is an area I feel very exposed, I feel very vulnerable, and my ego comes out a little bit and it's like, you don't know what you're saying, you don't know what you're doing, this isn't your language, even though it is, it's the language of my ancestors. But that is something where I have to overcome the ego judging me to be able to feel confident enough to make it invincible as well. So I wanted to share that answer. I do have other answers to this prompt, but that one specifically, because it's a great example of just something general in our lives that really, if we dig deep into it, there is a hidden, a little bit of a hidden spiritual component that affects us in the areas that we feel exposed in. For prompt 2, what is my personal Achilles heel? The wound I avoid, but I know I must face. For me, this, I will be honest enough to answer it because I've talked about it in other podcast platforms before and in books and things, is my dog phobia journey. This isn't something that I avoid, but sometimes I avoid the ability to face it and change the story. So what I avoid is being a little bit different than before, so handling things differently than before, not acting out of the old habits of fear and fight or flight, but actually challenging myself to walk head on and even just like walk past a dog. Or that challenge for me, it's not necessarily something that affects me with people, but it's something that affects me with dogs, the way that I see them. I still have an Achilles heel towards them, even though all of the incidents that occurred that caused the phobia to develop when I had it, it was not their fault. But it's something that I'm facing and something I avoid mentioning to people as well, talking about it. So I feel when I talk about it, I actually do feel more equipped to handle it and change the story. And I need to face it. I need to face it every day. It's something that I do face every day. But every day is a little bit different. Prompt 3. Have I ever chosen glory over growth, and what did it cost me? In a sense, I did. So my sophomore year of high school, before the globe shut down, I was seeking a different path in life, mainly related to public speaking, not related to like spirituality at all. Like my soul was nowhere around anything that I was doing. I was overworking myself in theater arts. I was doing costuming, student directing, writing, teacher's assistant, acting, like speech, all these things. I was overworking myself to the bone because I wanted to prove that I could do it, that I could go into acting, that I could do these things, that I could, you know, have a career in theater and performing arts. Not something that, like, eventually once I started seeking healing, I'm like, that's the opposite of who I want to be, because the reason I was seeking that was an Achilles heel. I was avoiding healing my trauma. So instead I was using acting and theater as a coping mechanism to avoid dealing with what was going on inside. And when I didn't have the ability to use that coping mechanism is when I was forced to heal and realize what I really want with my life, which is more so helping people, helping the environment, helping animals, helping everything, spiritual coaching, connecting to the universe, and overall, like, the awakening journey of the soul. I work for my soul, I do what I do for my soul, and before that point I was living for the ego, and I crashed. I was burnt out. So many things started to spiral and go wrong in my life, and what it cost me was my sanity and my peace of mind and my ability to enjoy the present moment and be a teenager, because I didn't really have the luxury to be a child in the same sense as, like, my peers with my upbringing, but I did have, you know, childhood moments. I didn't allow myself to be a teenager either. I took on so much responsibility, and I do this all the time, where I act well above my age, I take on extra responsibility, and I overwork myself, and I don't allow myself to just accept and be like, oh, I'm still young and I still have time. Which is, I guess, that's a different Achilles heel. Something that I've accepted more now, like in my life now, when I've gotten out of toxic environments, I have allowed that, and I've allowed myself leniency, and allow myself to rest and be in the present moment. But yeah, what it cost me was my peace. Was my peace of mind, was my peace of heart and soul and body and just peace in general. So prompt 4 is, what armor do I wear to protect myself, and what does it prevent me from feeling? Currently, I'm not quite sure. Currently, I'm not quite sure. I more so answer this from, like, a past perspective, that kind of, and I mentioned it in kind of my response to the other prompts, I used to have a lot of coping mechanisms to just deflect, an armor of deflection, but also, like, excuses, just like being like, oh, well, because this happened, that's why I'm acting this way, and there's no other reason. I would make excuses. I would scapegoat areas of my life to avoid dealing with other areas of my life when I was younger. Now, most thing I do is I think that what I have been uncovering in these last few years when I started working with people and having clients is to, in my personal life, not become too people-pleasing. And I think I wore people-pleasing as an armor most of my life, and the times where I take it off and I'm like, I am going to, for once, put me first in these situations, those are the most pivotal points of my life that helped me make changes that I'm actually happy with. So to relinquish people-pleasing and take on the new, not armor, but new guiding light of compassion for others, while also having compassion for myself. And I think with people-pleasing, it prevents you from feeling your own feelings. And for a while, I was not feeling my own feelings. And it's so, so, so important to feel your own feelings. Self-care is not selfish. It is important to be compassionate for yourself. So lastly, prompt number 5 is, if I surrendered my Achilles heel to divine healing, what would it change? If I surrendered this dog phobia, this is the one that's like, it's, for the most part, it's healed, but there's still some residue. If I surrendered that, and I surrendered, I guess, people-pleasing, okay, and I surrendered perfectionism. I do have perfectionism a little bit as an Achilles heel. I still notice that I'm dealing with that. And fear of judgment, which I've overcome for the most part, but like I mentioned, I feel exposed when it comes to trying to public speak in Greek, which then makes it seem like I don't understand what's going on in conversations. And it's fear of judgment. So let's surrender that, and other things. What that would change is my ability to be confident in myself, my ability to be happy. A lot of times the things that we don't heal prevent us from being happy and take away our ability to experience some of the beautiful aspects of life. So if I surrendered it to divine healing, I would be happier. I would be more free. And the thing is, it can be very scary, and especially like the dog thing, because there are days or weeks where I don't even remember that I had a dog phobia. And then I remember it and I'm like, oh no, I need to go back to this mindset, because it can be so scary to live without something that was so dominantly controlling you, like an Achilles heel, like this weakness that is not a weakness, it's a wound that you can heal and integrate. So it's very, very important to remember, recognize, realize that when you let go and you relinquish these things that are weighing you down, even though it's a little bit scary, what does this mean? How do I live without it? You're actually able to live a more soul-fulfilling life and a life led by your highest self. And if Achilles was able to acknowledge that and protect his heel and integrate his wound, he might have been able to be more successful, and maybe he could have found glory in a different way. So that being said, what Achilles showed us was the price of wrath, pride, and greed. And I guess the lust for power, which is very fitting, because this week's episode is how the 7 deadly concepts, also known as sins, damn the soul, as shown in Greek myth. In my teachings that I do on the realm of inspiration and with clients and coaching sessions and workshops that I've led, I refer to it as the 7 deadly concepts, because it is not necessarily that it is inherently wrong to experience these things. It's human. What it is these concepts are deadly for the soul. So it's not to shame, and I feel like that the sound frequency of sin is shameful. Let's not shame ourselves. Let's acknowledge we all have shadows, we all have skeletons in the closet. We've probably all fallen prey to these 7 temptations, 7 concepts that damn the soul. In spiritual development, they are things that prevent you from ascension. This is true. So long before the church named them sins, the Greeks told stories of gods and mortals consumed by desire, rage, pride, greed, and more. These weren't just moral failings, they were spiritual derailments. So in this episode, we will explore the 7 deadly concepts as shown in myth and how they still haunt the soul's journey today. We will be getting into the general story of 7 myths that showcase the cautionary tales of the 7 soul-damning concepts. I took on the challenge to find one example for each of the 7 in myth, and honestly, it was a challenge to uncover the best examples, because there are quite a few examples in myths, and that makes me wonder, were myths cautionary tales about the prices of these concepts and the consequences? Were they told to be able to teach us the consequences of our actions if they come from the lower polarity? We've established that there are metaphors and myths, and each episode proves just how true that is, each episode of this podcast, and it will continue to do so moving forward. So this week, we will see how the story of Arachne displays the price of pride, King Midas, the price of greed, Zeus and Europa's, the price of lust, Medea, the price of wrath, Apollo versus Marsyas, the price of envy, Sisyphus, the price of sloth, Erysichthon, the price of gluttony. There are many myths that can fit into these concepts, but these are the ones that are best fitting for this round of 7 deadly concepts and myths. But let me know in the comments if you want to see a part 2 in the future so I can add it back to the cup. Let's start with Arachne and the price of pride. Let's talk about her story a little bit. So I'm going to give a little summaries of their stories and how that story is fitting with this concept. So Arachne was a mortal weaver whose tapestries rivaled the gods. When praised, she scoffed, "Even Athena couldn't match my skill." Athena, among being the goddess of wisdom, battle strategy, was also a very talented weaver and had some goddess powers over aspects of creativity. Her as an archetype is really, one, represents the ever-changingness of Athens, is how it's evolved over time, because in myth, what she represents changes as Athens' values change. She's the patron goddess of Athens, or was the patron goddess of Athens in ancient times. Also, she very much represents a divine feminine aspect of things, whereas Aries could be the toxic masculine aspect of things, especially in regards to war. So she was known for her skills of weaving. So Athena appeared in disguise and challenged Arachne to a contest, and watched Arachne weave scenes mocking the gods. Her work was flawless, but her arrogance unforgivable. Athena tore the tapestry. She revealed herself as the goddess Athena and cursed Arachne, transforming Arachne into a spider, doomed to weave forever in silence. So the spiritual depth behind this myth is pride blinds the soul to its place in the divine order. It replaces reverence with self-worship. See, Arachne had potential, had gifts rivaling the divine, and she could have worked with the divine and maybe had a good relationship with Athena, maybe could have learned from Athena. Athena could have been her mentor. Instead, she used pride as a way to elevate her self-worth and was, by result, punished. Her soul's consequence is that she was transformed into a spider, and that is the myth that is the origin of where spiders come from. So she had the consequence of no longer getting to live the life that she wanted to live. She was revered as a spider for the webs that are weaved, but also a lot of people don't like spiders. So it is a kind of double-edged sword. She gets to spend her life weaving, but she does not get to have the glory that comes with it. And what's important to know is that pride today shows up as spiritual arrogance, ego-driven comparison, or refusal to surrender to mystery. And this is a common thing that is being experienced in humanity every day in our modern society. So hubris, or pride, blinds the soul to its place in the cosmos. It replaces awe with ego and leads to isolation. But pride is only the beginning. Once the soul believes it stands above the divine, it begins to crave more, not just admiration, but possession. And so we descend into greed. Time for King Midas's greed. King Midas loved gold more than anything, more than music, more than kin. When Dionysius offered him a wish, he asked that everything he touched turn to gold. At first, he rejoiced. Flowers stiffened into gold, sculptures, goblets gleamed brighter. But then his food turned into metal. Eventually, his daughter came to him, ran to him, and froze in his arms, a golden statue. Desperate, he begged Dionysius to undo the gift. The god relented, and Midas bathed in the river of Pactolus, washing away the curse. But the river still carries flecks of gold, a reminder of desire gone too far. See, at first he thought it was magnificent to turn inanimate objects into gold, but when he tried to eat, his food also turned into gold, and you can't eat gold. And then his beloved daughter, his loved one, also turned to gold by his touch, and you can't have connections with gold. Gold doesn't bring happiness, true spiritual happiness. Greed turns abundance into emptiness. It devours joy and leaves the soul hollow. And Midas was surrounded by hollow things due to his greedful wish. Greed is the ego's hunger for control and accumulation, mistaking wealth for worth. The soul's hunger is connections. And when you fall to greed and you lose all connections, you feel hollow because the soul is starved for what it seeks. Midas turned his daughter into gold. His gift became a curse. Greed manifests in modern days as overconsumption, hoarding, or chasing status at the cost of connection. Greed feeds the hunger for things. Lust feeds the hunger for bodies. One seeks gold, the other seeks flesh, but both leave the soul starving. That's where we get to Zeus. Zeus's lust. And Zeus's lust should be what the myths are called in general, because how many myths are just Zeus's lust? There should be an episode, and I should probably do it, of just Zeus's lust. The consequences of his lust. It was hard to pick just one, truthfully. But this one I picked because of the price of innocence, like the loss of innocence, and how lust can take away the beauty of the soul. So Zeus is known in myths as being a shapeshifter, and he saw Europa gathering flowers and was overcame with a desire. He transformed himself into a gentle white bull and lured her onto his back and swam across the sea to Crete. There he revealed himself as Zeus and claimed her. Europa did not consent to any of this. He didn't consider what she wanted. He only considered what he wanted. And that's some bad karma for him. Now Europa bore him sons, but her innocence was stolen by lust of the ego. In this myth, Europa carries more divine characteristics than Zeus. Lust distorts sacred desire into dominance or voyeurism. It disconnects eros from reverence. The lust that Zeus was over, he was controlled by it. It controlled him to transform himself into an animal and drag a woman without her consent across the Mediterranean Sea and claim her without considering the fact that she is a human being. Lust causes you to not see other people as human beings, just as how they can serve you. And Europa bore him sons, so of course he was happy, because in most folklores and myths and history, the king is happy as long as he has heirs. But I guess in, generational cycle breaking, Zeus doesn't really care, because he doesn't even consider the fact that he could be overthrown. He just likes the most of him being out there. And here's the thing, there is the metaphor and the myth of Zeus being the embodiment of the creator in creation. Like he is creating, procreating with different nymphs and deities to create different things. And there could be the metaphor of, it's just a metaphor of creation in general, which, yes, but for the purposes of this episode, it's a metaphor of the price of lust. Europa is abducted, loses her innocence and her virtue, and is forced to live a life that she didn't want to live, all due to the fact that Zeus could not control his lust. This damns his soul. And I don't know if there's a myth out there, I have not found one, where Zeus dies and has to, face judgment, because I'm sure he would be in the depths of Tartarus for his crimes if it's upon his karma. Lust becomes addiction. For Zeus, his lust is an addiction, and Europa is just a consequence, just collateral damage. It also becomes objectification of other people, focusing too much on the body and not the soul, and using others to fill voids. He used Europa to fill some sort of void, to prove to himself, maybe from pride, that he can have whatever he wants. And when desire is denied or betrayed, it doesn't fade. It flares. Lust, unmet or unamused, often gives birth to wrath. The soul burns where it is once longed. Let's talk about that. All of these 7 deadly concepts feed into each other. If Europa had even considered denying Zeus, he would have slaughtered her on the spot. It would have turned into wrath. And there's a lot of wrath in myths. Hera has a lot of wrath, but who we are talking about today is Medea and her wrath. See, Medea was betrayed by the hero Jason after sacrificing everything for him. Her family, her life, she sacrificed everything, believing that he would hold her in high value. She was seeking glory and pride. She ended up becoming consumed by rage when he didn't choose her in the way that she wanted him to. She didn't just curse Jason. She killed their children. Actually, Medea is also known for not just killing her children, but also, some interpretations, consuming her children. The ultimate act of vengeance, her wrath made her infamous and feared even by the gods. Wrath is fire without direction. She was angry at Jason for his betrayal. He promised her that she was going to rule lands with him, was going to be his queen, his one and only, was going to hold power and influence. And when it came down to it, Jason chose what was convenient for him. He didn't care about the promises he gave Medea. He was just giving promises to get by. And they had children, and she knew that men care about heirs, so she attacked her own children. No maternal instinct there, consumed by wrath. It destroys what the soul holds most dear. As souls, we hold our connections most dear. It destroyed her relationship with her children. Her children do not exist. Her children went back inside of her, basically, to most interpretations of what occurred. So, wrath lost her everything. She could have accepted that Jason was a bad guy and tried to move on and be happy with the children that she had, regardless of who their father was. But she was so consumed by a bruised ego that wrath took away and destroyed everything. Wrath there is the soul's fire, the soul's passion, but when it turns destructive, that's the ego. And wrath consumes, it doesn't purify. Fire can purify, but the fire of wrath destroys everything. Medea became a symbol of maternal betrayal, betrayal to her children. Not the fact that she was betrayed, but she betrayed herself and her children by letting wrath consume her. In modern days, wrath shows up as revenge, which is what she did. She considered that an act of revenge, uncontrolled anger, and sometimes spiritual burnout. She was so consumed by the betrayal that she turned to wrath, to anger, to revenge, that she didn't even stop to consider that what she was doing would have dire consequences for her soul and her life. Wrath is loud, but envy is quiet. Medea wasn't envious, she was angry. But we got quite a few stories of envy in myth. It creeps in after the fire dies down, whispering that others have what we lack. So the soul removes to the back seat and the ego starts to take control. Envy is the biggest voice of the ego. And in myth, it's Apollo's envy that we are talking about. Not Hera's. Hera's got some envy too, but saving that for a special Hera episode. So, Marsyas, a satyr, a half-goat, half-man, found a flute discarded by the goddess Athena, and he played it beautifully. So beautifully, in fact, that he dared challenge Apollo, the god of music and creativity and poetry and all of these things, and prophecy and medicine, and he's also a very big archetypal character in mythology, to a musical contest. The gods judged the contest, and Apollo did win, but barely. It was a neck-and-neck close tie. This half-goat, half-human almost beat the god of music when being judged by other gods. Oh, that's a bruised ego. See, Apollo felt anger, but it was an envious anger. That a mere satyr had rivaled him, so he acted from that jealousy. No one who rivaled him was going to walk the earth. So he flayed the satyr alive, stringing his skin from a tree. The river Marsyas still runs red in Pyra, a tribute to talent punished by envy. Apollo's actions in that myth solely come from envy, and Apollo has other myths of so many different aspects of the complexity of humanity almost, where he has some very positive myths and some very negative myths, and him being consumed by envy resulted in a very talented half-goat, half-man no longer being allowed to live. And he acted from anger, but it's a different wrath. It's envy. It's from jealousy, where he is so blinded to anything and everything that he just doesn't want something that could rival him existing. Envy punishes brilliance. It turns admiration into cruelty. He could have admired this talented creature, but instead he was so jealous that he killed him. This is different from Arachne and Athena. Athena punished Arachne for being disrespectful and acting too boastful. Marsyas, he didn't act boastful. He was just happy with his skill, and he was performing. And also satyrs in myth, the half-goats, the half-man, they are known for, like, they have the playing of the flutes and pan, and he's just excited and happy. And Apollo is so envious that he takes that joy away from him and takes the life from him so that he can be truly the best. There's some pride there too. Envy poisons admiration. It turns inspiration into resentment. Marsyas suffers from daring to shine, and Apollo's cruelty reveals divine insecurity. Envy is insecurity. Envy appears as jealousy, sabotage, or spiritual comparison in modern days, which is very true. There's a lot of envy around, there's a lot of jealousy, and it stems from a place of insecurity, thinking that someone has something you lack. Apollo wondering, how could he be so special if this half-goat, half-man can do almost as good as he can with playing a musical instrument. Envy poisons the heart, but gluttony numbs it. When we can't have what others do, we turn inward, trying to fill the void with excess. The ego gorges and numbs the soul, but it's never full. Now it is time for Erysichthon's gluttony. Erysichthon was a king who was very prideful and thought that he could do whatever he wanted. So he desecrated a sacred grove of Demeter, the goddess of harvest and nature, cutting down her trees for timber, not really considering the consequences that might occur in nature by destroying a natural environment and potential habitat for animals and growth of foods, and very much reminiscent of the Lorax story. In retaliation, the goddess cursed him with unsustainable hunger to teach him a lesson of what it feels like to have some necessity taken away from you, like his ability to sustain himself and feel full. So no matter how much he ate, he was never full. He sold everything, even his daughter, to buy food. He was so consumed by hunger that he didn't care what he had to sell to get food. And in the end, he ended up devouring himself. Gluttony is hunger without soul. See, he had no bearing, no awareness for the consequences of his actions when he decided to destroy a sacred grove for his own self-interest. So he had to feel the consequences of what it's like to not be able to sustain himself and feel full, because he took away something that helped keep the sacred grove sustained and alive. Trees help sustain environments. What was remaining is this gluttonous hunger. He kept eating. Nothing could fill him. And yes, it was a curse. It's not his own choice. But his actions to just destroy a sacred grove, that is coming from the ego. Gluttony is the soul's attempt to fill a spiritual void with physical excess. He could have apologized, reached a common ground with Demeter. He allowed himself to be consumed with the anger. See, a lot of these problems in the myths would be solved with communication. He could have communicated. See, the consequences, he eats himself. Gluttony becomes compulsive consumption. Food, media, validation without nourishment. What he experienced, and this is in the modern day, we experience a lot of just like compulsive consumption with no nutrients. We are just consuming things for the sake of consuming things. That's what he was experiencing. He wasn't able to experience being truly revitalized. Nutrients. He took away nutrients from the sacred grove, so he was not able to experience it himself, and so he was gluttony consuming things. Now, there are other myths that do better show gluttony. I just think that this one was very fascinating because it kind of shows the fact that like when you allow pride to control you and you are acting selfishly and you are taking without being considerate of other people, that karma will come and get you. And Demeter was acting from karma, and then he had to feel what it was like to not feel fulfilled. So he was acting gluttonous by just taking whatever he wanted without any care for the consequences, and so he experienced the real feeling of gluttony, of consuming without nutrients. So eventually the hunger exhausts us. The chase becomes too heavy. And so the soul slows, then stops, not in peace, but in resistance. And that's where we get to sloth. Sloth isn't rest, it's spiritual inertia. Sisyphus's sloth. Sisyphus was a clever, maybe too clever, being human. He tricked death twice, chaining Thanatos and escaping the underworld. But the gods had the final word. He was condemned to roll a boulder up a hill for eternity. Each time he neared the top, it slipped and crashed down. No progress, no rest, just endless repetition. We can interpret that sloth is laziness, but spiritual sloth is just acting without care for progress or motivation. Sloth isn't laziness, it's spiritual resistance, the refusal to evolve, become someone's own prison. He refused to die. He refused to accept the fact that it was his time to transition out of the physical life and experience life without a physical form. It's resistance to transformation is what sloth is. It's spiritual apathy. He is trapped. His punishment is being trapped in apathy. He is not rewarded by his task. It's not really a punishment, but it is. He never really makes progress. He is stuck in a loop. Sloth is being stuck in a loop. Sloth shows up as procrastination, numbness, or fear of change, or fear of death, fear of evolving. And so Sisyphus, he was smart, he was clever, he had potential. But he really isn't known for anything else except trying to evade death. And then, as a result, being
trapped in the underworld, doing a mind-numbing task for eternity as his punishment. Like, if you're going to avoid change, you're going to be stuck in a cycle and you're not able to change. Sloth is truly resistance to change, and also resistance to evolve in every sense of the word as a soul. He was doing everything possible to run away from his fate. Sloth is running away from anything and everything that you are meant to do and experience. Sloth is avoidance. When we think about all the myths, so let's pull it back, a little review, because that kind of concludes that a little bit, since that's really all we have time for in diving into the myths. I should do like one episode per each of these and really explain in more detail. But Arachne's spiritual consequence of pride was separation from divine order and a fall from grace. King Midas' spiritual consequence of greed was obsession with materialism and loss of soul nourishment. Zeus' spiritual consequence of lust was misuse of divine energy, and he got himself tangled up in some karmic entanglement. Medea's spiritual consequence of wrath was destruction of sacred bonds and soul fragmentation. Apollo's spiritual consequence of envy was spiritual blindness and the inability to celebrate others. Apollo is the god of poetry and music. He should celebrate people who are expressing musical gifts. But envy takes away your true character. Your Erysichthon, spiritual consequence of gluttony was insatiable craving and disconnect from divine simplicity. He was a king. He had everything he could have ever wanted, ever need. But he went to Demeter's sacred grove to take her trees. He wasn't satisfied enough in his own life, and then he was punished by not being able to fully satisfy his hunger. Sisyphus' spiritual consequence of sloth and resistance to growth and spiritual stagnation, and he is stuck in the underworld doing a soul-numbing task because he didn't accept the change that was coming. These 7 aren't sins, they're soul traps. Each one pulls us further from the divine center until we forget we were ever whole. But myths can also remind us that every descent is a chance to rise. If we can name the shadow, we can reclaim the light. So there is potential in other myths that show what can happen if you embrace change and growth. So now let's go to conclude this episode so we can find out if next week's episode is one of those stepping into the light episodes. Let's talk about our affirmations. So the affirmations to reclaim the divine path. This is kind of what these myths showcase, is a loss of divine path. So let's get back on it ourselves. I choose humility over pride and grace over glory. My soul is nourished by simplicity, but not excess. I honor desire as sacred, not selfish. I release rage and embrace forgiveness. I celebrate the light in others as a reflection of my own. I am awake, alive, and devoted to my soul's evolution. And finally, I walk the path of virtue, not because I must, but because I am ready. So let those affirmations help you set your tone for the week. And let's get into the journal prompts. There are 5 journal prompts for this week that we will discuss at the beginning of next week's episode, and feel free to answer them in the comments, and they will be in the description as well as the affirmations for you to reference as you go throughout the week. So first is, which of these concepts do I struggle with the most, and how does it show up in my life? Second, what mythical figure do I resonate with, and what lesson do they offer me? Third, how does my soul respond when tempted by power, pleasure, or rage? Fourth, what would it look like to transform one of these concepts into a virtue? And fifth, where am I resisting growth, and what fear lies beneath that resistance? So answer these in the comments and we'll talk about them next week. And now it's time to pull from the cup to see what next week's episode is going to be about. Let's see, let's put it up to the face. I'm not feeling that one, let's see. Oh, no, not that one either. Let's try it again. Okay. Third time's a charm. Third time's a charm. Okay. Let's see what we got here. Oh. Symbolism of Cerberus. Manifestation of our fear of death. We must overcome. Okay, that's not planned. That's not planned. But we just talked about Sisyphus fearing death, and it resulting in him, being an example of sloth. And now next week we are talking about the symbolism of the fear of death in myth, Cerberus. So we've talked about Cerberus quite a bit in these beginning episodes, and now it's going to be his time to shine next week. So join me next week as we dive into Cerberus and his symbolism, and I will see you then. Let's keep seeking to reawaken the ancient wisdom that has been left for us right before our faces in myths, folklores, and legends. Let's uncover that wisdom and integrate it into our awakening journey. I will see you next week.